Hello and welcome to the Swine Disease Reporting System. This is the report number 57. My name is Edson Magalhães here at SDRS.
Hello, my name is Giovanni Trevisan with the Swine Disease Report System.
Hello, my name is Guilherme at SDRS.
Hello, Daniel Linhares, also with the Swine Disease Reporting System.
So thanks for joining us today. The report of today, we're going to cover the findings from the previous month, the month of October 2022, regarding the swine disease reporting system information. But today we also have the pleasure of having here Dr. Andréia Gonçalves Arruda joining the SDRS podcast. Dr. Arruda is currently an assistant professor at The Ohio State University in the Department of Veterinary Preventive Medicine. And Dr. Arruda got her DVM from the São Paulo State University and her master's from the University of Minnesota. Her PhD was at the University of Guelph in Canada, where she worked with the applications of novel epidemiological tools for disease control and prevention in food production animals. Dr. Arruda has developed research focused on swine emerging and re-emerging disease dynamics, applying this knowledge to better understand how to control and prevent them. Dr. Arruda, it is a pleasure for us to have you here at the Swine Disease Reporting System podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today, SDRS team.
Thank you, Dr. Arruda, for being here with us. It's, as Edson said, a real pleasure for us. But before we start, Guilherme, can you provide us an update what's going on in October in the Swine Disease Report System data?
Yes, today we are going to cover the reports kind of differently because we are having a high activity of respiratory pathogens and systemic pathogens. So we are going to talk about all of them instead of go page by page. So talking about all these pathogens, PRRS virus, influenza, and mycoplasma, we are having an increased activity of positive submissions this month. First, with PRRS, we are having an increased activity in win to market category that is increasing for the second month consecutively. And for mycoplasma and influenza, we are having an increase in all age categories. So this is expected for this time of the year, since this season that is coming, we are having this increase in respiratory pathogens. But when we move to the disease diagnosis, that is just data from ISU VDL, we are also having spikes in the overall respiratory pathogens. And some of other pathogens, we have an increased number of submissions as well for them, for confirm this tissue diagnosis, such as Streptococcus suis, influenza, Trupperella pyogenes, and also mycoplasma.
And wow, lots of activity going on there, Guilherme.
Yes.
Any information shared by the advisory group of how they have been dealing with these pathogens at this time of the year?
Yes, the advisory group mentioned that it's good to not have all of these pathogens occurring at the same time in your production system. So you have to have some animal health interventions before the season starts. So they can apply, for example, vaccination of PRRS virus before the season starts, or mass vaccination of influenza to avoid to have these pathogens at the same time, and also protocols for eradication and control of mycoplasma. So with this kind of measures, you can decrease the losses that you have in a production system to have multiple pathogens circulating there.
Well, you mentioned about PRRS, right, that there is an increased activity there, but also if you look for the sequence, looks like there is also more requests for that. Any comments from the advisory group on this specific topic?
Yes, looking to the SDRS data, like retrospectively, since 2020, we are having an increasing number of PRRS virus sequencing submitted to these VDLs that we have in our project. And when we see this last month, we also have an increase in the PRRS virus sequencing. And one question that we asked to our advisory group, if something is going on with PRRS that that they are testing more for sequencing. And most of the answers were related with the severity of the cases that they are having the production system, that they are having more losses with this virus and also more clinical signs. And at the same time, some of them are sequencing more because of the effect of the L1C variant that emerged recently, and they are testing frequently to see if these specific strains circulating in the farms.
Wow, interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And how about the enteric pathogens? Do you have any activity there?
Yes, it's not only the respiratory ones that we are having problems this month. About the enteric pathogens for PED, for example, we had a trend to decrease in the last month, but in October right now, they are increasing again, mainly in the winter market category that we are having an increase in percentage of positive submissions for PED. And also in the cyclic regression model, when we look, it's still above the expected for this part of the year.
What does this mean?
Well, for our advisory group, we ask if this is still like a problem from the first semester that we have breaks and maybe these piglets are coming downstream here at this time of the year, or if it was like more lateral breaks that were occurring. And they mentioned that both things are happening, like a lot of piglets that are coming positive from the first breaks that occur in the first semester, but also they have some small lateral breaks that are occurring at the same time.
So just another reminder of the importance of biosecurity and biocontainment, right? Especially at this time of the year in that grow finish population, because it's at this time of the year that they amplify the viruses that find a way to the other grow finish, but also to back to the sow farms. And we're kind of seeing the initial of the beginning of that curve right now. So just another reminder: biocontainment, biosecurity, simple things like showering in, showering out, and like I said, immunizing the pigs and kind of do what you can in terms of people and pig flow, right? Shared resources such as people, vaccination crews, dead removal, that kind of stuff. Gotta watch that, especially this time of the year, to prevent a big wave of outbreaks here going into this fall and winter.
That's very important, Daniel, to remind that, because when you say we see that, that's very clear what's going on now for PRRS and influenza, this major role of the win to finish age category, that there is this huge increase in number of detection, but that also occurs for the enteric coronavirus like PED and Delta coronavirus. So it's a very, very important factor, the detection and the activity of these agents in the win to market age category.
No, very good. Thanks for the discussion, guys. Thanks, Guilherme, for bringing the updates from the previous month. Now a question for Dr. Arruda. We're gonna move to our discussion with her today. Dr. Arruda, you worked with spatial epidemiology analysis, developing research in Canada, more specifically in the region of Ontario, enrolling farms to identify possible PRRS positive site clusters and collecting demographic and biosecurity data. Could you explain the importance of regional PRRS monitoring programs?
Sure. I'm a little biased. I'm a big fan of regional control projects, whether for PRRS or multiple pathogens. And I think there are several benefits from them. The first one that I would say is just really these programs work as a way to bring everybody together to the table. So as a researcher, a lot of my best questions, I would say, came from those meetings where people were kind of discussing logistics and frequency, but really end up talking about disease prevention, disease control, monitoring, and asking really good questions. So I think just having a way to have people get together, people from different expertise, people from different backgrounds, and just discussing a topic that is important for everyone was one of the positives from these programs. The other one, I think, is kind of the short-term or almost real-time aspect of it. We still have an active project here in Ohio, and people are still using that for alerts, right? So you're just talking about these outbreaks that are happening. People talk about, hey, I have an alert, I have an outbreak here, and this is where those pigs are going next, right? So maybe they're going to be placed in a nursery, or maybe they're going directly to slaughter. So it's really helpful for people to know that, and people really use that information to plan traffic, routes, and all of that logistically. So I think that's the other, I would say, more immediate benefit that those programs can bring. So just kind of a channel of communication for people to talk about things that could be changed and cases that could be prevented. And I think the third aspect is what I did a lot in Canada, and then also with some smaller projects in Minnesota, which was kind of the long-term data analysis piece of it. So a lot of the data that are collected through those projects can be used to try and answer those kind of big pictures questions, right? So as an example, in Ontario, there's always the debate on area spread versus kind of long distance spread, and we were able to look at that with the data there, and we found hotspots. So we did find that some parts of Ontario had more cases of PRRS that could be due to just area spread, which obviously we couldn't differentiate between airborne or others. But also we saw that for the other question, which was, my neighbor is positive, am I more likely to be positive? In that case, that was a no, which kind of surprised everybody and really kind of led to another follow-up research that we did looking at networks. So I think those kind of bigger term, as you collect more and more data, they can also be hopefully answered with that type of monitoring and data.
Andrea, just following up with, about this area spread, you said that, of course, in the study you were not able to differentiate between airborne and other routes, but based on your overall experience with this network analysis and dealing with area control programs, what would you speculate in terms of this, the area spread? Is there a way to rank in terms of importance? Is it airborne? Is it people movement? Is it? Are there some other topics there?
I think that's the million-dollar question, right, Daniel? Which one is more important? And I think if you talk to 10 people, you're going to have 5 and 5 with different opinions on which one is the most important. So we weren't able to actually differentiate between that, right? We know it's really hard to sample and sample air to figure out exactly, it was air for sure versus fomite or people transmission. But our network piece pointed out as the movement and sharing of things, different service providers we were looking at the time, guild, bore, truck or transportation, feed sources, all of that appeared to be important in determining outbreaks, especially in our case for grower populations. So it might even be different, right? And in Canada, they didn't have as many farms filtered, for example, and the density was also not as crazy as a region like Iowa. So there's also that to be taken into consideration. The region is going to also be, the weight of the different factors could be different depending on the region. So yeah, I think that's still the million-dollar question, right? In every single discussion, this comes up, and I don't think we have a good answer. We know both of them occur. I particularly think that the person movement and truck movement is a little bit higher on my list, but I know the airborne transmission, we know that it can also happen.
No, that's great. Another question we get here a lot, Andrea, is what's the importance of transport biosecurity as a means for transporting, right, or spreading diseases around?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I know there is a recent call for proposals from SHIC, really trying to get at that question. We know that most of our farms and companies that provide transportation, they have SOPs. Now, how much of that actually get done in a day-to-day busy schedule? I don't think we know that for sure. Right. So even when I'm called for disease investigations and people send me their protocol, I go, okay, it looks great. What happened on October 4th, right? We don't know for sure. And we know it's a very fast-paced industry. So we think it's very important. I personally think it's a very important mode of transmission for PRRS, PED, and other pathogens. We have some data to back that up. We've done some PED studies at the time of the outbreaks that we had in 2013, 2014, where we could definitely detect PED on farms that were going to slaughter, even if they were negative farms, and then back to other farms. So we know there's a huge gap there. And we know some farms are even baking their trucks, right? But maybe sometimes even the basics of cleaning the cabin frequently and what happens to the driver. Do they help with the transport? Do they go in the farm? I do think that's data that is very different to capture, but there's definitely incentives for doing that, because I think as an industry, we are realizing that that's a very important gap that we may have there.
That makes sense. Pick up your brain on another kind of applied research that you have done with following herds that broke with PRRS and tracking time to stability, right, defined as consistently winning negative pigs. And you found that herds that broke with the virus that was RFLP 174, it took longer for them to achieve stability. So wanted to pick your brain on the importance of tracking such metrics over time, considering that the virus continues to evolve, and so those relationships may change over time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a huge value in collecting production data and also monitoring diagnostic-wise over time. I think that one of the biggest frustrations that I see with producers or veterinarians that have farms that break with PRRS is, when are things going to get back to normal, right? I think that monitoring and looking at data almost in a real-time fashion, so near real-time, really helps with expectations. And I think that's very important, not only for people that are making management decisions, but also for the barn level employees and workers that are actually working with the animals. So I think that a lot of the data capture and analysis and kind of almost hopefully real-time and sampling really helps with setting expectations. And yeah, we've seen in the past with some lessons that we learned in the hard way that PRRS viruses do behave differently. Even now, right, we hear reports of viruses that are doing a lot of damage and some others that are a little bit milder. And obviously that also has to do with the herd type and the population and history and all of that. But we are learning more, looking at those measures and seeing how close we are to hopefully having everything under control, or even better, eliminated. Really helps with the planning. The other thing that I've seen too is getting this type of data. So let's say data coming from processing fluids can be used also as a very powerful tool to motivate barn personnel. I feel like, and even if it's not so good news, I think we can still, information is still pretty powerful. And I think we can use that to our advantage to just have people more really excited on trying to prevent and control disease and understanding how it's transmitted. So I think that can also be one other good point of keeping good data, looking at production records regularly, and doing some monitoring.
Even for the herds that are already endemic, right? You mentioned the processing fluids. It's positive, yes, I know it's positive, but how about the CTs? And so the herd should watch that CT slowly rise time, all right, week after week, at least a trend of increasing CT towards negativity. And if you don't monitor, you don't know.
Yeah,
I like
absolutely.
when you said that people should allow people to get excited by monitoring closely those results and see progress over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we also have different sample types that we can also use nowadays and use that as a learning opportunity to motivate people to just learn more about disease dynamics. I think that's very exciting and could be used for incentives almost.
Dr. Arruda, still talking about PRRS virus, but at some point in a break, we have the question like, do we depopulate this farm or not? So you published some data regarding depopulation as well, and the impact in not only the production system, but also in the employees, like how they are thinking about this procedure and the different methods that you can use for depopulation. So when do we have to depopulate a farm, and what is the main benefits that we have when we use this kind of method for control PRRS virus?
I think you bring a really good point there, Guilherme. And we've been talking about the population for PRRS for decades. And I think this is a really good time to kind of clarify to the listeners that depopulation can be used for two different purposes. One of them is if we have something really bad happen, right? So for emergency situations, let's say natural disasters, or if we have an exotic disease detected in the US, or even worse, a zoonotic disease detected in swine populations in our case. So in those cases, we're going to go for killing all animals as quick as possible and as humanely as possible. So that's a lot of the research that we've been doing for methods that would have been applied in emergency situations. Now, when we talk about PRRS, I think we really mean repopulation. So basically emptying the farm, right? And that either going to be controlled movement for slaughter, or we're going to replace those pigs somewhere. Leaving the farm empty for a while, cleaning, disinfecting a lot of times, hopefully, and then repopulating the herd. So obviously, just from the description, this can be a very costly, very expensive process. So one of your questions was when this would be recommended or not. And so from my experience, when people used repopulation for PRRS was usually when they either wanted to change their genetic material, so they took that opportunity to basically buy all new animals from a different genetics. The other option is maybe when there are other endemic diseases that you may also want to get rid of. So let's say if it's a mycopositive, you haven't been successful in elimination projects, that would be a good time to maybe repopulate. Like I said, it's a very expensive process, right? So it's going to depend on a lot of things, like the pricing for co-sows, logistics, right? What are these people? Remember, you're also going to have a production break, right? So it's not only the cost of selling the animals and buying new animals, but also you're going to have a break in production, especially if you're buying gilts. So what are you going to do with the farm workers in the meantime? Do you have somewhere else they can go work? How are you going to keep that workforce there, especially for larger farms? Can also be kind of a logistic questions that is going to be weighted on the decision as well. And the other circumstance in which I've seen people repopulate because of PRRS was if they had a negative flow overall. So if all the breeding herds are negative for PRRS, and maybe most of your nurseries or maybe all of them, we know there is a big value on keeping PRRS negative herds, right? So that's another reason why I see people decide for repopulation is where if all of the other herds are also negative, then they may want to keep the whole flow negative. The other thing to take into account that I know people take very seriously, and they should, is how does the neighborhood look like, right? Do you have a farm a mile away that is positive? So what is your chances of rebreaking? And if the chances are low, that may be another reason for depopulate and repopulate, specifically for PRRS. I think I've touched on all the main reasons that I think people would decide for repopulation.
I think you did. We did not talk about the virus characteristics yet. And one of the hot topics that we are covering nowadays is the co-circulation of multiple strains in the breeding herds. And you have been working on that about co-detection of these and the approach to work on this arena. So can you elaborate a little bit of how frequent co-detections occur in breeding herds and what is the impact of those co-detection in production parameters and in the health of the animals?
Sure. Our research that we did in the last few years, unfortunately, we only had 5 herds enrolled in that particular study, but they were all of different demographics, and they were also using different PRRS strategies or had different PRRS virus dynamics, I would say. But we did follow them for about a year. So keep in mind, it's a small sample of farms that we used for that study. But in that situation, we did see different lineages and variants and the same farm, even in the same day of sampling. So we did see that. I personally think that occurs more often than what we think. I think that's a pretty common event. We just don't sample enough to know, right? So as Dr. Linhares said, you don't know what you don't know. If you don't sample, you won't know. And we know that sequencing can get expensive quite quickly as well. So I think that the occurrence of multiple lineages or variants within farms, especially breeding herds, I don't think that's an uncommon find. Now to your question on the impact on production, which is a great one. We did try to get at that question in our study, but we had a limited sample size, so we were not able to get enough data to look at that. But I think one would hypothesize that perhaps if you have more lineages, that could negatively impact your production. That would be kind of my thoughts on it, but we still need to get enough data to investigate that question. And I think we have a lot of production data very commonly. That wouldn't be a problem, but we don't have enough sequencing data, at least not historically, because we have been just sequencing one sample kind of as a norm for our farms when we have an outbreak or even when monitoring. So it gets expensive, but I've been recommending that, especially for tricky cases, or if you are in the middle of your control project or elimination, that you do sample multiple, hopefully individual level samples as well, to see how many variants you have there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was it for today, guys. Thanks a lot for the discussion. Thanks, Dr. Arruda, for joining us today. It was a really good discussion, and I see you guys next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.